Not a problem. It's your show.
Okay.
You can do whatever you want.
Oh, great.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so we can start. We are also on a live stream on YouTube channel of our department. So maybe we have followers there. So welcome to everyone. I am Giuseppe Ferrara. I'm a PhD in applied geophysics and president of SCG of student chapter of University of Naples. And welcome both to in person and online to our seminar. First of all, we are honored and proud to have a guest, Dr. Ken Tubman, president of SCG. And I want to thank you for the availability and interest shown for this event, requested by our members and associates, to remark how important it is to train and inform our students about the role of geophysics and future prospects of SCG in the rapidly changing world. I also want to thank you, the ambassador, for the external relationship of our student chapter. In this case, Luigi, that is here with me, and Filippo Accomando, who have allowed us to organize this lecture. In addition, I want to thank you, our department, DISTAR in Naples, in the name of Vice Director, Professor Diego Di Martire, for the presence and the logistical support, to whom I give the floor for initial greetings. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Just a few words. The head of the department, unfortunately, is not present because he is involved in a previous meeting in Rome. We are honored to host the president of SAG, Dr. Tubman. As we know, a large number of students, are involved in different activities in the SAG, since from 2020, probably, in outreach, field camps, and many of them won different awards. Therefore, it is important for us to share this moment with Dr. Tubman, and also to participate in with this occasion in order to improve our knowledge. Therefore, I can leave the floor to the president, Giuseppe, in order to show the activity.
Thank you so much, Professor. And so we can start, Dr. Tubman, when you want.
Okay, thanks. So good afternoon, everyone, or evening, or wherever you are. Happy to be here, and thank you for organizing. And I'm especially happy to get to talk to groups of students, because you are actually the future of SEG. And it is my hope that you can be the near-term future of SEG, not some hypothetical situation out in the future. But I see Luigi and others organizing, taking control, and leading your local student chapters. And this is terrific. And it's one of the things I think SEG can do for people. We'll talk a bit about that. I will tell you, I have a lot of slides, and I tend to think slides are boring. So feel free to ask questions at any time. I am happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. And if you leave me to slides, then be prepared to be bored with boring slides. But I do have a little bit about what's going on at SEG. And I have then a little bit on some other aspects of physics. Oh, great. Do we have a question? No, maybe not. Okay. So then I have a few things on some other applications of geophysics. I specifically do not have anything in oil and gas because I think that's widely known. And a bit about the future is how the energy transition will take and how things are going. So I have borrowed some slides. I will tell you that the technical work is not mine. Alita Lee has given me some wonderful slides on smart cities, Peter Duncan on some other measurements. And so we'll look at those as we go through. So let me share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that now. And so I'm going to start off, as I said, talking about a few things about what's going on in SEG. And I thought about a title, and the title I chose was Broadening for an Inspiring Connected Future. And what do I mean by broadening? You know, you may have heard a little bit, I've done some videos and we've put some articles out there on the SEG transformation. And this transformation is largely about mindset. SEG has been around for a very long time. And my feeling is that we kind of got stuck in our ways. And so what we need to do is broaden our mindset, broaden our approach, and broaden our appeal. And so really, okay, maybe it's on the right window. There we go. You know, we're in an environment where the petroleum sector, oil and gas, is really looking at a lot of new technologies, digital technologies, AI, things like that. And certainly there's an energy transition, a large push for that. But there's really a wide range of applications for geophysics, more than just oil and gas. And SEG must deliver value for our members and stakeholders. If we're really going to be useful, and we really have to deliver that value. And I would argue when we looked at the data, if you recall a while ago, SEG took a step back and said, well, okay, what do we need to do? And so first we said, what problem are we solving? And if you look on the left, you'll see our membership plotted out over about the past decade, where blue is active members. That's people like me. We've been members for a very long time, and we're staying members. And then there's the student members in that reddish color. And if you look over the past decade, the number of student members has dropped a lot, which is partly why I'm really happy to see you guys here. And the associate members, those in the middle, those who are early career, mid-career, have also dropped a lot. To me, that's an indication we're not really meeting the needs and delivering enough value. And on the right, you see demographics. And so we're a pretty old population. And so correlating with that is the revenue for SEG. And look, we're not we don't try to make profit. We're not a company that's making money to deliver dividends, but we have to get enough revenue to pay for our programs, the student programs, publications, things like that. And obviously the 2 years of the pandemic were really bad. We've recovered up a bit from that in 2022, but not nearly back to where we used to be. So what we did last year, I guess, about this time, about a year ago, we pulled together focus groups to listen. And we pulled together groups of students, people who are members, have been members for a long time, people who aren't members, people who were members and quit. So a whole variety of these focus groups to say, what is it that SEG might do for you? What are you looking for? And one of the things that came across, well, there's a few consistent messages, and that's what we have here. There's value in the community and connections. And that was one of the strongest messages, that we need to create a sense of belonging. If you look at the demographics and the membership, this is what's happened for people like me. I've been a member of SEG for many decades, longer than we'd like to admit. And so I have friends, I've had career benefits from it, etc. But we need to create that sense of belonging for the next generations of geophysicists, people like you, people who are a little farther along in their careers, already have jobs, but are still pretty early. And we need to do that for people all around the world, not just those who are maybe North America or even just US centric. So this is a bit what I mean by broadening. Our appeal has to be around the world and across different age groups. Another thing that was very much in common is career development. Everybody, every single, well, not every single person, but across every focus group, a strong message was people care about career development. That looks different at different stages of your career. For someone very early, it might mean getting a job and getting training. For people in their jobs, it might mean connections to get the next job, to be prepared for that. The diversity, I already mentioned a little bit. Everybody wants more geographic representation and more demographic representation. It's also, as pointed out, our approaches are outdated. And another very consistent message, yeah, we've heard this, what's different this time? And that's a very valid thing, right? A lot of these problems aren't new, but it's not clear that SEG has acted on them and done something. So from those focus groups, we came up with 3 areas to work on. We realized we can't do everything, so we picked a couple of things. The first is community and connections. The next is career development, and the last is governance. So those are the 3 priorities. And so what I'm trying to demonstrate is this time is a bit different because we're doing something. We're not just sitting and talking about it. So the first thing we've done is make a community on Slack. And I don't know that you have your cameras ready to take a picture of the QR code. That will take you to the registration link. It's also on the SEG homepage, and if this is being recorded, it'll also be on YouTube. So you can get that QR code and please register. So we built this community on Slack. And what I really like about this is how it came to be. Remember, I said I particularly like I enjoy talking to younger groups. So we were talking to a group of younger folks, and we talked about this community aspect, and they said, well, why don't we have an online community? And I said, that's an interesting idea, but it's really easy to throw out ideas. It's really hard to implement. So my question was, well, okay, it's a great idea. Are you willing to do it? And we have a young woman. Okay, she's not really young, but young compared to me. Ellie Ardakani, she is an immigrant from Persia living in Canada. So there's some geographic representation, some age differentiation here. And she actually stepped up and said, okay, I'll do it. And so she created a Slack community for us. She did this a few months ago. Her initial target was in, I think, 3 or 4 months to get 1,000 members. And I got to tell you, I thought she was on some psychedelic drug when she said that. I didn't think it was possible. And yet here it is, a few months in, and we have more than 1,300 members. It has membership that is significantly younger than our SEG membership, and it is significantly more global than our SEG membership in terms of balance. So it is exactly the kind of people we would like to attract. We are not limiting it to SEG members. So even if you're not an SEG member, please join in. And it's been pretty active. We've already had people looking for jobs, and we've had a lot of jobs posted there. I think we actually had at least one connection made for a real job. We had someone with a very good idea. They wanted to do a mock interview because they had something coming up. So they were able to find an expert in their field who could grill them and set up that interview. We have people sharing resources and looking how to work with different software. That's worked well. We get them the help they need. There's been some success stories with people doing it. Honestly, you're recording this video. I would love to have you post it in the Slack somewhere on the Slack workspace so that other people can share if you think it's worth it. There's opportunities out there in terms of looking for jobs and other networking opportunities. Actually, one of the things Ellie is working on now is to get more people involved with helping to organize the community. So we're trying to get some students and younger folks who are very familiar with Slack to keep it going, provide some content and keep it organized. It's not lost on me that there were lots of questions on what Slack, how do I do it? It doesn't appear to be active because people didn't know how to use it or didn't know how to turn on notifications or whatever, or they, like me, they didn't just have it up on their screen to see it all the time. And all those questions came from people over 50, which kind of highlights the problem. We also have some celebrations of community, and we actually just have some people posting jokes and having a good time. And notice, for example, land seismic survey in a nutshell, that's somebody's interpretation. And for fun, I shared that with a friend who runs a seismic company, and he pointed out in this industry, lots of times you're actually banging your head on the ceiling, not a wrench. So that's one of the things we've actually done. It's implemented. Hopefully that's why it's different, but hopefully this is also a way that it's easy for people around the globe to connect in ways that we can't if you have to show up at a physical meeting. And it's also much more tailored, much more natural for younger folks in our communities. The next thing we're working on is career development. So we're doing a variety of things. We're revamping on the webpage, career development paths. We're developing a recognition and reward program and some mentor offerings. We're also working with SPE on natural language processing for a combined search. So SEG and SPE are working together. So we'll have a co-branded search engine to look for information. It'll tap into both of our knowledge databases. And one other thing we're doing with SPE is around federated learning. And this is a really interesting thing. It's not just with SPE. Let's see, SLB is involved, Shell is involved, and a number of companies, and Petrobras, and what they want to do is find a way to match up people looking for jobs with jobs that are out there. And at first it seems obvious. You write a resume, you look for jobs, but they think that by using artificial intelligence, they're a way to find atypical matches. So here's a job and here's the stated job requirements. There may be some skill sets people have that fit, but aren't really the kind of the standard thing, and look for that. Same thing, if someone can list their skills, it may be able to bring forward jobs that are non-traditional for them. This could be particularly important at a time when the oil and gas industry is transitioning, the use of our discipline is transitioning, and there's far more different types of applications out there. Anyway, that's out there. And finally, the last focus area was on governance. And when I say governance, I don't necessarily mean rules. I mean our habits and behaviors. And we're still finding things that are just a bit of an issue. You know, I really, really want younger people to get involved. And I learned recently, SEG kind of went through an exercise, transitioning, naturally voted first and picked the names they recognize. And so that by definition gets kind of the people who've already been involved, and it makes it harder for new people to get involved. Another example is some of our membership policies, our board meetings, but even things like in the leading edge. One of the most read pages is the president's page. And so what I've done this year is say, well, who are the people we need to represent? And some of those people, as I mentioned, younger and more global. So if you look at the December issue of the Leading Edge, it was written by Samara Omar from Colorado School of Mines. So rather than some ancient luminary of our industry, we have a student at Colorado School of Mines writing it. January's was written by Ellie Ardakani, the spectacular woman I mentioned before, an immigrant in Canada. And in March, it was written by Pablo Savornin, who's from Ecuador. So he actually wrote about the energy transition as an opportunity for Latin American geoscientists, and talked about how there's a changing world, the skills that geophysicists bring to the game in terms of climate modeling, adaptation and access to water and food, and in the energy transition is really important. And he points out how there's lots of world-class potential in Latin America for renewable energies, hydrothermal, CCUS and storage and things like that. And so the point here is we're also trying to give voice to others. And you'll see over the next few months, what we're going to have is global representation in each of the president's pages throughout the rest of the year. So this is what I mean by governance and behaviors. I'm hoping we can demonstrate that this time really is different, and SEG has to modernize and to actually change, not just continue to do things the way we always have. I can stop for a minute. If anybody has any questions on SEG, I'm happy to answer them before I dive into kind of the next section. Alrighty. So I don't hear anything, but again, feel free. It might be a little hard for me to see if someone raises their hand, but I'm sure someone else can see it and point it out to me. The next thing I'm going to run through is just very quickly run through a few different applications. You know, again, we think about oil and gas, and I got maybe one or two pictures of that, but no big reflection seismic. We all know what that is. But there's lots of ways that our discipline and our skills can be put to good use. One of them is a company I'm a little bit involved with, but it's a friend of mine who unfortunately had cancer. And he gives this talk and gives a wonderful story. He's better now, but he talks about taking the skills we have in seismic imaging and bringing them to the medical field. And you know, in medical, they take ultrasounds. They have narrow azimuth and wide azimuth. Just as in seismic, we have narrow azimuth and wide azimuth. But the difference is, how do you use them? Okay, and of course, the angles and the frequencies and everything's really different. But a lot of it, turns out a lot of the technology is very similar. And on the left, you see a needle being inserted into a patient, and it's being guided and by ultrasound. And on the right, similar to doing seismic while we're drilling a well and trying to guide it. And it turns out that with a little bit of effort, we can apply our geophysical technologies to medical acoustic imaging and ultrasounds and get much better signals and much better images. Actually, this is a small startup company. Chuck Peng is the person who started it. Maurice Nessum, who's a past president of SEG, and was a president of Western GECO for many years. And we've brought medical doctors into the practice so they can say, is this better or worse? And it turns out in real time with these, we can get better medical images. Is it yet good enough to make a difference in the prognosis? We're working on that, but it's showing some real promise. So this is a very different application than you might normally think of for our discipline. A few of the things, and these slides are from Rob Stewart. And Rob is, he's a research professor at University of Houston, and he works on all kinds of things in geophysics. One of the things he's working on is looking at uncovering with ground penetrating radar, uncovering dinosaur bones and fossils. He also has done an interesting study on in a cemetery looking for burials using ground penetrating radar and LiDAR in a historic museum. And here's an interesting little test. Here's a line of ground penetrating radar. And as you look from left to right, or I should say, if you go from right to left, it's from older to newer burials as they look to see where these tombs are. And notice, if you will, that how the signal changes quite dramatically. And so the obvious thing, anybody know what the difference is? So apparently, at about this time in the 1940s, the rules changed and they started to encase the caskets in concrete. So you get much better reflectivity than you did earlier, where the caskets were just wood and would eventually decay. So it's a much harder interpretation problem, but still you can see it. Again, a very different type of application. Rob also and others do some things with planetary geophysics on, for example, this one on the moon. And planetary also involves meteors coming down to this planet and looking for craters. A new field also is digital acoustic sensing, where we have the ability to make incredibly accurate measurements, right? Across a wide array of applications. This is still being developed. There's some things in exploration seismic, but there's lots of applications in terms of monitoring earthquakes and buildings. And this will have a lot of applications in terms of smart cities, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. Intrusion and perimeter monitoring. Okay, there's things like in the wild, watching wildlife, protecting around pipelines and other infrastructure, or probably some political applications in terms of countries wanting to monitoring activities. This is an application from fracking and oil and gas, where if you look at the color on the right, time goes from right to left, and what you're seeing is the indications of strain, stress and strain in one well from fracturing happening in another well. And so you can see stress induction when the fracture's open, when the pump shut off, when it closes. And this has led to the ability to get far more detailed interpretations of what's happening as we drill oil and gas wells in horizontal wells, looking from the left, where originally it was just dots, to now we can move across to the right, where you can actually get interpretations of the fracture volume and fracture analysis in each of those wells. So much more advanced interpretation. And, so lots of different applications. This is, again, what I mean by broadening. It's not just oil and gas. The last couple of examples were oil exploration, but certainly the planetary is different, medical applications. And another new field that I think has lots of potential, lots of social impact, and lots of benefits for our society is around sustainable societies and smart cities. And the slides I'm going to show now are from Alita Lee, who did it, I think, some of this work when she was NUS, the National University of Singapore. She's now at Purdue. She's got a great group there and working still in collaboration with NUS. So there's applications like efficient energy recovery, understanding how to be very efficient with what we're working on and the energy we're using, optimizing energy use, and passive methods for civil engineering applications. more and more as cities get built and they're more complicated, more intense, making sure the infrastructure is resistant to whatever changes we're going to encounter. And real-time monitoring of whether it's geohazards, monitoring that infrastructure we're putting in, and reclaim and recycle, being efficient with waste materials and landfills, and carbon sequestration as we work on climate change and its impacts and mitigating those impacts. So let's talk about a few different things. Today, more than 50% of the world's population live in cities, and that's only increasing. Over the next 20 or 30 years, that percentage could increase way above where it is now. And urban space is very different and very intense. And there's the potential to be very vulnerable to changing environments. So when can geophysics add benefits? Can certainly do it in the planning stages and site investigation, understanding conditions, the subsurface conditions under cities, looking at the infrastructure that's going to be put in, what might be needed, infrastructure that's already existing, whether it's pipelines, electrical power, plumbing, all kinds of things, right? And so there's lots of applications for geophysics. And what's the safest and most efficient way to utilize the space? Historically, cities have grown, I won't say completely haphazardly, but the zoning and regulations have changed over as time goes on. And there's a real possibility now to be much more thoughtful and intentional in how we plan. Singapore, for example, already has requirements for doing geophysical studies before additional development. And we're starting just the early stages of some conversations there with proposals for how SEG and how geophysicists can set requirements and be more consistent in application of those. In the construction stage, engineering and management of safety, the impacts of constructions on the surroundings. And you might think, okay, this all sounds great, but what are the real implications? Well, here's an example of what happens when you may not do all of your work beforehand. I don't know about you, but if I pull into a parking spot, I'd like my car to still be there when I get back. And here's a real example of how, well, that just wasn't the case. Clearly, if some site investigation had been done beforehand, they would have found this potential sinkhole, which then created quite the mess. And that goes on for a bit. And this is not the only example of that. Here's on the right, you see another example from China and a subway that was being built. And so there's clearly some safety risks and opportunities to alert engineers. And then in the operational stage, we can get into monitoring and preventive maintenance. Is the infrastructure in good health? And again, it sounds theoretical, but there have been some real examples. You may remember not too long ago in Florida, in the United States, there was an example where it turns out there was a leak in a pipe near a pool of a building. And it was a residential building. And sure enough, in the middle of one evening, it was a disaster. The building and the leak finally got to the point where it was just too much for the structure and it collapsed. And okay, it's easy to write this off as a one-off, but I will tell you, I have friends who live in a building in Houston and the building didn't collapse, but it didn't collapse because they identified the problem beforehand. It was in some ways very similar. It wasn't a problem from a pool, but it was a problem from some leaking pipes in the basement. And eventually the first floor got flooded. The building had to be evacuated and the residents couldn't live in it for months for fear of some catastrophe like the one we're looking at there in Florida. And of course, there's other issues as well, not just buildings, but on the right, we see an example from a bridge that was constructed. This is in China. And again, I don't know about you, but when I drive, I tend to prefer that my vehicle feels like it's in one place and the ground underneath is relatively stable. Now, many of us remember a video from a long time ago. It was a Tacoma Narrows Bridge up in the Northwest in the United States. And it had some motion like this and eventually collapsed because the wind that had picked up was getting some resonance. And this is a much more modern bridge, has the same things. Now, the folks who built this bridge claimed that it was designed to be able to take this kind of motion, but it wasn't a full force wind, and yet there was still a lot of flexibility, a lot of motion going on this bridge. And even here, they did have to shut it down. So this is the kind of infrastructure monitoring that I think is now capable that we can be doing on a routine basis. And more infrastructure is being put in underground to take advantage of the ability to make cities even more dense. And we have the ability to do monitoring while drilling these tunnels to make sure it's safe, not just for the tunnel drilling, but all the infrastructure above. It can be instrumented with the fiber wire we talked about. And there's a case study from Singapore where they actually put in and identified abandoned piles to make sure that in the infrastructure and in the tunnel drilling, they didn't encounter these and didn't cause any problems above and these piles that were still supporting other infrastructure. And okay, step through that example. Oops, sorry. Let me go back. So then there's another example really in terms of 4D seismic can be very useful for interpretation of CO2 sequestration and carbon capture, utilization and storage. And this is something that's going to be far more prominent as we look to address the CO2 issues related with climate change. And our skills from developed in geophysics and our technology, often developed by oil and gas, can be very applicable here. A different type of application for sure, and yet very much around identifying a potential reservoir, the limits and integrity of that reservoir. In this case, in oil and gas, the integrity is important to see if the seal is still in place so that the oil is still trapped. Here, it becomes an ongoing long-term monitoring problem to make sure the seal stays intact and the structural integrity of the reservoir stays intact to contain whatever CO2 we are pumping in to store. And there's an example in Sleipner, a field in the North Sea, where they actually identified some leakage there. And so this is a problem. And it isn't just, this is the kind of thing we need to know beforehand. If we're storing it, we need to ensure that it's staying stored. The governments are going to require this monitoring and this knowledge. And this is another example where it's more than just seismic. A variety of our applications come into play. From seismic, here's time-lapse gravity also picks up the problems. And by using these all together, we can get a good picture of the integrity of the reservoir and make sure that when we look for long-term storage, we actually get it. And I want to point out some of these applications are out there and we need to look for them. I had a conversation with this professor at a university in Dallas, Moshe Shahandashti, and he's a mechanical engineer, a civil engineering professor doing research on infrastructure. In this particular case, it was pipelines for water and other city infrastructure. And he was noticing that when there was earthquakes or other issues, there was potentially significant damage to the city's infrastructure. And so he was working on mapping out infrastructure, identifying potential weak points, which was older infrastructure, which was newer, which might be more at risk. And interestingly, he had no, so far, utilization of geophysics. And I might argue that geophysics could bring tremendous insights into his modeling. At this point, they're doing the modeling, but when they take it to real application, geophysics can add a lot into their prediction of which parts of the infrastructure need remediation beforehand, which need it in a proactive manner to make sure that it survives any challenges. And so I think there's opportunity for us to identify some of these other studies and some of these applications. We believe there are people who are either using geophysics or can benefit from geophysics and don't know it. And finally, a note on sustainability. And I encourage you to look at the Geophysical Atlas published in the Leading Edge. And it talks about all the ways that geophysics has a role to play in the sustainability in many ways. And it's a great article to link our technologies to the UN Sustainability Development Goals. It's a great way to look at things. So that's a quick roundup of a whole variety of applications, a little bit about what's going on at SEG. And I really want to end on what I would be a plea and a request to you. And that is that really what SEG needs, okay, we need that community. We need a broadened view. We need a different view. And that broadened view is going to come from folks like you, younger than me. It's not that I'm not willing to help and participate, but we need ideas that are catering to the next generations and to people around the world. And rather than have a lot of old people tell you what you want, I encourage you to step up and to tell us what you want. You need the resources, great. Come with a plan and let us get you the resources. This is what happened. This is how we got our SEG community on Slack, which is now live and vibrant and going and has already grown far beyond what I expected. And so we need to do that, and we need to do more things like that, and to have you step up and take leadership. So I encourage you to also speak up with, what do you want out of SEG? There's a few things I can think. Look, there's the obvious connections, there's community, there's friends, there's job opportunities, technical exchange, but I actually think there's more that it can do. You know, there's leadership opportunities. So you have people who are active in your local chapter. That's leadership development, right? You're learning how to lead a group. I encourage you to play broader roles in SEG, not just in your own region, whether it's the SEG Council or committees or even the SEG board. We need different voices. We need the different parts of the world represented, younger people represented, and it's not going to happen if you wait for someone to ask. It's going to happen when you step up and bring forward opinions and bring forward opportunities to take actions. So that's my challenge to you. And if you're not exactly sure how to get started, reach out to me and ask. I'm happy to help. But I'd rather help you implement your ideas than my ideas. And I'm happy to take any questions and discussion about anything you want to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this fascinating presentation, for the interaction on different professional figures, and most of all for the future of the rule of geophysics. Now, Luigi will present the different questions that the associates, but also the people that are here in the room. But obviously, if online there is someone who wants to make a question, is free to do it. And the different question of the people here.
Okay, I want to invite the people inside the room that compiled the form and gave to us their questions. If they want to ask them directly to the president, I think it will be wiser and more interesting, because it's not just an interaction, but it's your question. So maybe you can interact with the president. And I invite you to come here so you can also be on the webcam. The president could see you and you can make your question. Okay, so we have the first one. You can present yourself and then do the question.
Hi, nice to meet you. My name is Marco, and I'm a member of the student chapter. So in Europe, we are living a very unstable moment, especially in the geopolitical aspect. How do you think this instability could affect the technological development of the research in geophysics, or the idea of georesources of people, for example?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I will try to answer it in terms of the way you asked on the technology side. And I think my belief is that technology is developed best when there's many people involved. That doesn't mean it has to be one group, but the reason we look to have things published and shared is someone will have an idea, they'll talk about it, others will pick up that idea and take it a little farther. And I think what the what the political instability is going to do is make it harder to share. Look, we have some Eastern European, we have some Russian geophysicists, and obviously it is harder for them to share and stay involved in the same societies now, right? SEG really struggled with this whole war that's going on now. SEG is largely a non-political organization, but we do have great caring for people and humanitarian suffering. And we had a lot of debates about this. The fact of the matter is we have governments involved. People have to deal with their own, the laws in their countries. There's a lot of different divergent views, not just of that war, this current war in particular, but all the approaches and everything that can happen. It's a real nightmare for SEG. Also, we are technical people, not politicians. So when we try to get in politics, man, we mess it up. But I think your question about how will it impact technology development, the biggest worry I have is we're not going to be able to share and interact with many good people who are going to be shut out of those interactions, where we'd love to be able to share technically with everyone. Look, to be honest, it isn't just that war. It isn't just the European geopolitical challenges going on. I see rising tensions between the United States and China. And we have many members in China. I have no desire to not be able to talk to them. What will happen as each country, I'm going to try to not be accusatory to one country in particular. I see both of these governments kind of picking at each other a little bit. You know, if one wants to be protective and not share technology with the other, I don't know how that's going to play out, and I worry about it. Because to us, to advance the technology, you know, you look at those smart cities, it's better for society. It would be better for us to be able to share those technology successes everywhere, better for everyone involved if we're battling climate change. And I really worry about that inability to exchange everywhere. So.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Marco. If there are other in presence or also online, they can raise their hand and chat with the president. Otherwise, okay, I see that there is one guy, Emanuele, our secretary.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Very nice to meet you and to be here. We just talked about renewable energies and the transition, the energy transition. I recently heard about hydrogen, natural hydrogen. Do you think that it would be really a future reality in some sense, or do you think it will be only something that will not find what to say a concrete realization in the future? It's only kind of an hypothesis of something temporary, to say. I don't know if the question is really clear.
Yeah, no, I think I get what you're saying. Is it going to be a reality, or is it just a false hope? Maybe something like
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I would say when it comes to technology, I remain an optimist. So look, it's really easy, and especially as technical people, we often go first to what's wrong with every argument. And that's a very healthy way to be. But I think it's also, we need to step back and say, okay, what's possible, what's right with it? And I'm hopeful that although I don't know that hydrogen will suddenly take over and will solve all our problems, I can easily envision a potential path where it's a significant contributor. And I don't see a future necessarily where we have one energy source dominating everything. I'm of the opinion it's going to be all of the above. You know, it'll be wind, it'll be solar, all those have problems. I don't personally see hydrocarbons going away. I think there's going to be a role for that. But whether it's hydrogen, hydroelectric power, nuclear, I think is a real possibility. As we I saw a great presentation recently on micro modular reactors. So the safety issues are mitigated because it's so small, the portability. So I think hydrogen has a role to play there. I've read an article recently on someone who's has been powering his own vehicle that way for a long time. Okay, for him, it's probably more of a hobby than economic, but the fact that he can do it says, okay, that means it's an economic challenge, and those can be solved with scale and new technologies. So do I know exactly how it's going to get solved? No. Do I believe it will be? Yes. And I think it may be too limiting if we think hydrogen has to be so big that it takes over everything. But that doesn't mean it can't be a significant contributor in part of a whole stack of energies we use. So, energy sources.
I have just another question that about what you said previously. We talked about the sense of a community, about the sense of a belonging to
Yes.
the SEG. Do you think it is important or better? Do you think how do you think it will be possible to gather together the several aspects of geosciences, for example, also applied geology, or also, so to say, paleontology, for example, because I think each sector of geology is important to the overall discoveries, how to say, in the future. So how do you think it can be possible to link all these interests in the geosciences?
So what I hope to do is start a trend. I can't do it all in 1 year, for sure. But recall that our annual meeting now is no longer the SEG meeting, it's IMAGE, and it is joint with AAPG. So it's geology and geophysics together. There are some bumps, right? We had some challenges with the abstract process, but anytime you work with other people, there's always some things to work out. We're also talking to SPE on things we can do jointly. Notice, for example, that I referred to the federated learning and the search engine. That's joint with SPE. There was last year, right? There was AAPG and SPE were thinking about merging, and they asked us if we wanted to join. And I admit, I led the effort that came back to the board and said, we don't want to. Why? In addition to the sense of belonging, part of that is a sense of identity. And I think that we have a sense of identity as geophysicists. So what I want to do is hold on to that sense of identity without being so insular that we think we know everything and we shut out all other disciplines. So I think there's an opportunity to work with SPE, with engineers, with geologists, like in IMAGE. But I think there's other types of societies. There is EAGE. I would love to be able to work with AGE. In fact, next Monday is the first meeting. I've set up meetings with the presidents of EAGE, SPE, and AAPG, and I'm hoping we can do this monthly and look for opportunities to work together. SEG is working on corporate memberships, and I'm going to try to get these other societies to come in together. I will tell you that we've proposed to other societies what we would call an association membership. If you join one of ours, then the other ones, okay, suppose you're already a member of EAGE. If you're not a member of SEG, maybe you get a SEG membership for a very cheap price, so that there's kind of, you don't have to join 6 societies, you pay one membership fee and get everything. How would it work? I don't know exactly. But other societies, some are interested, some are kind of pushing back. They don't want to do it. So, it's okay if you have opinions, push on all your societies. I don't think it's, you're students, you don't yet have a big income. I don't think it's fair to expect you to join 6 different societies. I'd like to find a way to make it easier for you and to go to one spot and to have all those resources together. That's a long-term goal, not right away. But I completely agree. We as geophysicists have to realize there's some things we will do ourselves, right? If we're digging into the equations and doing some really detail, no one else is going to care. But if we're actually solving problems, and this is what our applied geophysics does, we can't do it by ourselves. We need to bring in the geology, the engineering side of it, whether it's petroleum engineering and exploration, or whether it's civil engineering and smart cities. We need to be able to work with those folks. And You know, you as students, again, I'm going to keep saying, this is your opportunity. You have a geophysics section. Is there a civil engineering student section in a society in your university? Are there petroleum engineering departments and student sections? Have you worked with those? If you start to build the relationships, you can also bring those to SEG and to the other societies.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point of view, especially because I generally see in Italy there is some of how to say separation
Silos.
the several
Yeah.
sections. So
Well, and it's not just Italy.
okay.
Yeah, humans, that part of humans is every place. And one of the things I've also talked about with other student chapters, how much do you work with other student chapters? So I find that most student chapters don't talk to other student chapters. And so one student chapter I talked to is what they did actually, their main goal is to raise funds. And they use the funds to send some of their members to Image. I'm like, what a great idea. So they have fundraising activities. And this is the only section I've ever heard that's doing this. But it's a great idea. It'd be great to see others learn from that. And then there's others. I only found one section. It was a very small student section. And they, because they were so small, I think there were only like 10 or 12 members. They were getting together with the log analysts and the engineers and a bunch of others. And I think they were getting more out of it because they weren't just talking about geophysics presentations. They were seeing presentations from all these other disciplines. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to add just a thing that one of our main aim as a student chapter member and as students to try to gather all the different aspects of geology, and we are trying to pursuing this with the outreach activities, with the field camps. In fact, we had the last field camps in a volcanological setting. The first one was in a hydrogeological setting, so we performed like hydrogeophysics. Then there was on active faults. Maybe the next one, hopefully, will be in an archaeological setting in Pompeii. So
Nice.
we are trying to put all the different things together and try to cooperate with the different students, PhD students that are not geophysicists, because we think that we are, as a geophysicist, a tool. Let's say we have a tools to solve geological and engineering problems, archaeological problems, like you also showed in the presentation. There are other questions in the room. Otherwise, we can switch online. Oh yeah, Mario, come here. A lot of participation today.
While they're walking up, I will say, I think what you're doing is a great idea. And if you're going to do a field trip to Pompeii, you might advertise that and get some really, really good participation.
We hope. Hi, I'm Mario. Nice to meet you. Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. Okay, my question is, what are the challenges associated with using machine learning to analyze geophysical data?
Well, that's a long answer. So let me be a little brief. I think so. The challenges for machine learning in terms of interpretation are, I'm not sure. Well, of course, a lot of the problems using machine learning in general, I think, apply to how we would want to use it, right? Data sets, biases, things like that. Now, there's an interesting thing. I think people say, well, you have to have really a lot of data. And the problem is geophysics has a lot of data, but I think sometimes we don't count it properly. When you look at a seismic survey, people say, well, okay, there's billions of data points, but I think you may not be able to treat each seismic point as an independent data point. It might be the survey itself that is a data point, depending on the problem you're solving. Whereas a lot of the really effective applications, whether it be Facebook or Google, predicting what we're going to buy tomorrow, they really do have billions of data points from a very wide data set around the world and many clicks. And so we have a lot of data, but I think it's very important to recognize how much of that data is independent, how much of it is really structured for the problem we're solving. If you want to be able to interpret a certain type of fault, or is this an oil reservoir or not, or is this a good place to solve CCUS or not? And that whole survey, whether it be a gravity survey or a seismic survey, that whole survey might be only one data point. So I think it could be kind of restricted for us in that regard. And I think, of course, we have the problem of ground truth. It's really hard to see what ground truth is. We think we know once we drill a well, but we don't really. So we're trying to match it to a very uncertain truth. You know, when I applied to university and was accepted, I had an interview with one of the professors, and he said, so my undergraduate degree was in physics. And he looked at me, he said, "You want to study geophysics?" I said, "Yes, I do." And I admit I wasn't sure why, but okay. And he said, "Why do you want to study geophysics? In physics, you know your input, you know your output exactly, and you want to study the system. In geophysics, we don't understand our input, we don't understand our output, and we want to define a system." He said, "Why do you want to do this?" And this rings still very true to me. We don't fully understand our input, we don't understand our output, and if we think artificial intelligence is suddenly going to make that model much more clear, I think we're at a stage where we don't completely understand how we're building the model. So I think it just adds to it. I would say that's kind of a unique challenge in addition to all the others that of usual applications.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I have a curiosity, apart from the technical point of view, but more with the future of geoscientists. The ever-increasing and improving algorithms of artificial intelligence, like in these months, we are talking a lot of these algorithms. Do you think that they are going to affect effectively the role of the geophysicist or geoscientist, and also the number of geophysicists needed, for example, in a company, say?
For that question, I will draw an analogy to a number of things we've hit in the past. When computers came along, all of a sudden, interpretation of a seismic section went from drawing on a piece of paper with pencils, which was very intensive. All of a sudden now you could click along a screen, or it would pick for you, and you wouldn't even have to click. So computers and 3D interpretation added a huge efficiency. Did the number of geophysicists decrease? Yeah, it did a bit, but their productivity went through the roof. But also what happened is the number doing just interpretation changed, but then how they did interpretation, the numbers doing other things increased. Remember, there are things we could do because we have computers that we could never do on just pieces of paper. Attribute analysis, seismic inversion. Look at all those applications that became possible with the computer. So if you only look at the decrease in things to do or effort because of going from paper to computers, now think of all the other things that were possible and how we spend our time. And I think the same thing is going to apply here. And that's true, I think, everywhere. We keep thinking that the next big thing is going to destroy job opportunities. And what it's going to do, I think, is change job opportunities. I have a friend whose son makes a 7-figure income posting videos on YouTube. You know what? When I was a kid, if you had told me someone could make that much money posting kids' videos on YouTube, I wouldn't have even known what that was. So there are job and career possibilities out there that we couldn't imagine. And I think the same thing is going to happen. It will create opportunities we can't even envision now. That's what I think is going to happen.
So maybe students should focus not only on being a great geophysicist, but also a great, let's say, now the term is data scientist. But let's say, so, and my curiosity, and I see that there are some similar question, is if you are going to choose a student for your company or for your, you have to assume one student, you would choose one that is really good at one thing. Let's say you are going to assume a a seismic interpreter, you are going to assume one that is really good at it, or one that is quite good at it, but is also quite good at with algorithms and other things. What will be your choice?
Well, so, okay, so much of that depends on the job. Let me reword what I think the answer is to what you're asking. I think an important skill, so you said, should they focus on being a data scientist? Should they focus on being just an excellent geophysicist? I think the answer is to develop core skills of being able to learn and being flexible and demonstrating that. And so I did my thesis was actually on borehole acoustic logging, and it got me a job. And I worked on that in my first job for a few years. I haven't done that for many, many years. I would argue what helped in my career was the ability to, not only the ability, but the desire to learn different things and to move on. And so it's that being able to demonstrate flexibility, being able to demonstrate a curiosity for new problems, that's the core skill you bring. Not being able to solve one particular problem, but the ability to learn about and solve any problem. I think of someone years ago, and my friend, he was a rock mechanics person, and yet one time the company I was at had a problem where the well seemed to have an issue. It was an offshore oil platform, and he was able to jump in, this was nothing, and model that you had 12 wells coming back together from differences, and they came together at the platform, and it was causing all the flow in the 12 wells when they got together was overheating the formation right there and causing problems. Just because he was smart enough to think about the problem and bring his math skills. Is data science an important skill? Yes. Are you a data scientist? I think it's just another tool in the toolbox, like being able to do math or communicate. So it's that flexibility. And I think that's the core skill. Be broad, be flexible. And again, it's being a member of and active in these societies shows you how to connect with people, shows you how to learn what other people are doing, how they're thinking in other parts of the world, other disciplines, and it aids that ability to be flexible.
Yes, President, I have a question, a curiosity. Focus on the first slide that you shown before. I'm thinking about the histogram demographic of participation, of student participation in SCG programs, but in general in geoscientists. In Italy, in the last years, we have a problem of the university geoscientists, bachelor, masters, and obviously it will be a problem in the next year for the PhD students. Despite all our divulgation and outreach activity, scientific activity as a student chapter, how can we attract middle and high school students to geoscientists, and then maybe if you want, if the guys want in geophysics, because yes, we are here with professor obviously, but we are all bachelor, master, and PhD students, but with the experience, how we can attract these students to make a choice for just scientific path of their career.
Well, of course, I would love to hear your answer to that as well. Not that you know it today, but as you work on it and you come up with things that are successful, please share it with others. I have seen, first of all, that problem exists in other places except maybe the Middle East. The Middle East and parts of Asia are the only places saying they're not having trouble attracting students into the discipline. In Stanford, I think it was, they recently renamed their petroleum engineering department, and they took the name petroleum out and called it something like natural sciences engineering or something like that, or resource engineering, and their student enrollment went up. So there's some things like that. I think we have to recognize oil and gas, although I spent my career in oil and gas, and I'm very proud of that, and I have very good thoughts on the oil and gas industry. There's some dialogue around it now that I think isn't fully understanding and has a bit of a bad reputation. So I think some of the words we use matter. I think there is the opportunity, though, to point out some of the other broader applications. applications to sustainability, applications to in climate change, in water resources, and to emphasize some of those and to get people interested in the technical challenges and the different ways it can be applied and not have it viewed as just one industry only. And I think that's part of the challenge. And that's also a bit of the answer too to the earlier question on, are we going to need fewer geophysicists? I think if you look at certain applications, certain representation in one particular industry, there may be less desire, less demand. But if you look across the board, that's where it starts to broaden and new opportunities will open up. And I think we need to present and talk about those new opportunities to get different people interested. Yeah. I also think that your student chapter, obviously running well, you know, if you can bring people in, invite them, you know, people who may not be interested, and it isn't just technical presentations, you know, go to Pompeii and have a good time, you know, have some beer and some wine at dinner. You know, there's lots of ways to build that sense of community and get people involved.
Yes, maybe it's important to make these experiences.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have other time, because you said to me that were in a rush, with other meetings. But if you have some minutes, we can have other questions from the guys.
Go for it. This is more important.
There are someone. Oh, okay. Yeah, come, Shiro.
Hi. How the companies see the SEG activities, and these activities play an important role in our curriculum vitae?
Sorry, can you say that again, please? The question again? It broke up a little bit. The audio broke up. And
how the companies see the SEG activities, and these activities plays an important role in our curriculum vitae?
So I think it depends a lot on the company in terms of how they see it. We spoke with one company, and we are continuing to speak with them about potential corporate membership so that they will pay a membership for every single one of their employees to become a member. But they had a very interesting view, because I mentioned, I think SEG provides some different opportunities than you might expect, like leadership development. You're leading your student chapter. Don't underestimate what that means in terms of and how it correlates to eventually being in a company and leading a group. There's many similar aspects. And one company we spoke with, they said they require people to give presentations at society meetings like SEG in order to get promoted. And that surprised me. And I said, well, what's your thinking there? And they said, well, it's an opportunity. This is a service company. And they said, we want people to get up in public and have to defend their ideas. It's one thing doing it internally, which is typically a pretty friendly audience. But if you get up in front of a large audience, you know, it makes people nervous. If you have to get up in front of 50 or 100 people and give a presentation, most people get nervous. So it's a great, relatively safe way to do it. If you get up and you get nervous at an SEG meeting, okay, you might be a little embarrassed, but you're not going to get fired. No one's going to throw stones at you or anything like that, right? But you still feel that tension, and it's a great way to get that ability to do public speaking, to defend your ideas. If someone challenges you firmly, okay, maybe, you know, sometimes there's firm questions, but I'd like to see more poster presentations where you get into a really intense dialogue and have to stick up for your ideas and go back and forth. And that's what this company was getting at. That's what they look at. So if people can't get up and do that in public, they're not going to get promoted internally. So that's one way. Some companies are, I would say, not so far-sighted. They go like, oh, well, this is just time away from your real work. So they discourage participation, which is why I think SEG needs to do a better job working with those companies and showing, look, we're giving your people better technical capabilities. We're giving them the ability to exchange ideas and defend it. We're giving them some leadership capabilities, abilities to interact with people around the world, which helps your company in these various ways. So we have to do a better job, and we're working on that. So some companies see great benefit, some not so much, which is to be expected.
Okay, thank you.
And then I think that also the experience we are doing as SCG member in a student chapter, both as member or officer, is a rare opportunity for us to experience some sort of activities like have a responsibility, have a leadership role that is quite uncommon as experience as bachelor or as undergraduate. And I think it's really, really important because we were talking before that me last year as president of a chapter with the 30 or something like these members was a really time consuming and required a lot of efforts, both physically and mentally. Yeah, a lot of responsibility, money that you have to move for things and so on. And I think that is an experience that could really help. And this is not a curiosity for you, but is an experience that I want to share with the guys that are here, because there are some guys that are both from the student chapter or not associated because they are from the university. And I want to ask you, before we were talking, that your role is really different, really more time consuming, but is really a great experience. And you were saying to me, okay, it is this, but I want that this role will be in the future for younger people. How do you think that a young geophysicist could lead the SEG, the SCG, and what will be the path for a young geophysicist to be there?
Okay, so I want to start by what you were saying on how time intensive and how hard, all the things you had to do as president that you didn't even know about, right? So right there is a lesson. Remember, when you all graduate and have jobs, and whoever your boss is, and you think they don't do anything, right? You're doing the real work and your boss does nothing. Take that lesson that you just described, that they're doing all these things behind the scenes that nobody sees. That's an important thing. And having some sympathy for that person and helping them can be important. The other thing, as a leader, to realize you don't have to or can't do everything yourself, and to split it up and to get other people helping is also a really important lesson. And that's also how I see it's going to be possible for a younger person to actually become president of the society. Now, we can start with younger people taking other roles, like I said, in the council, but maybe as an SEG board member. SEG board member is not nearly intensive as being president. You know, most board members don't give presentations. Most board members aren't involved. I have meetings every single day. But when you get when we get more people involved, and so it isn't just one person involved, but you have many, hopefully many young people involved, now you can start to divide up the work so that if we can get to the point where there's enough people involved that as president, someone who still has a full-time job, they can act more a little bit like a midfielder and distribute the ball more. Okay, I'm going to do this part. That needs to get done. Please, you handle this, you handle that. So it's a way to get more people involved and to share the load, which I also think fits with really how work is changing, right? Work, new generations of people at work want a different work-life balance. My work-life balance was I worked. And if something had to get done, I worked. And when there wasn't any work to do, which was never the case, then I had a life. That's not the case anymore. And so I think the presidency work, it all needs to kind of change in that same direction. And then it can work that way. It's going to be a transition. We're not there yet.
Yeah, I think that to involve more people possible, most possible number of people is really important. And I think that SCG is moving toward this direction because, and I saw that there was Lori connected before, that me personally experienced the SCG committee, European committee. I see that the SCG is trying to involve as much people as possible, and I think that is the best path to go. to
Yeah.
follow. Yeah.
But
And-
that doesn't mean we can't have much younger people or full-time people who are still working take other board roles, right? It's the president in particular that is very, very time intensive. There are still directors at large. There are still other roles. There's committee assignments, committee volunteers. There's still lots of things that lots of people can do for SEG that still gets that leadership development and active engagement without it being almost a full-time work. So.
The idea, in fact, also with the student chapter in these years is not to put all the stuff to do in the hands of a president, but to the effort of a vice president, secretary, treasurer, responsible of this event, responsible of this other event. The president can breathe and do also the stuff of his project.
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, because I retired, I have the time to do it, so it's okay. If I didn't have the time to do it, it would force me and others to also take that different approach. But I think distributing the load like you're talking about, frankly, it just makes more sense. You get better decisions when more people involved. You get more, and more people have learnings and activity when you distribute the workload like that. So
yes, the responsibility for more people than one.
yes.
Okay, I think that we are out of time. We can leave the president rest before his next meeting. And I would like to thank him in the name of all the student chapter and in the name of our faculty advisor that are Professor Fedi and Dr. Maurizio Milano that now are in another meetings, so they could not be here. But I think Maurizio is to thank also Lori and Annabella that I could see them following us online. It is, I think, a great, let's say, achievement for us that the managing director of a SCG program and Lori that is really a great person for SCG that is managing the near surface section, all the committee are now with us. It's really important for me and I think for us. I would like to thank every one of you for attending, and maybe we can arrange another meeting with another figure, maybe with Annabella or with Lori to talk with them for their activity. And I leave the floor to Giuseppe for final.
Yes. So I thank you again, you, President, for your availability, your desire to stay with us. And I think I talk in name with all the participants. On YouTube, I know that on YouTube there were more people to follow the seminar. So it's, I'm glad to say this. And so we can conclude. We will waiting for you in Pompeii in October. Okay, so we can drink beer and wine together, together also with these people of quality, of course, wine of quality. And so I can say goodbye to the next time.
Thank you very much.
And see you in Houston this year.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I enjoyed it. Thanks for the questions, and I look forward to the Pompeii visit.
Okay. We will waiting for you.
Okay.
Bye bye.